On the last episode of the Keepsake box. Cream didn't know if it was the first time that Peaches had stepped out or if something had just gone wrong that time. She couldn't trace the situation back to the beginning. At any rate, it was obvious that Peaches and Sticks had used my money to branch out on their own. But because Angel, my point A, would obviously have tipped me off, Peaches decided to reach out to another point A who was not on our approved list, breaking rule number 3. Also breaking rule number 3, Peaches decided to sell to a point C, completely unaware that he was connected to Antonio. Maybe it could have just worked out and she could have just replaced the money, but it was bigger than that. It turned out that the drugs that she received were of poor quality. Upon receipt, the point C refused to pay. Peaches was left with drugs that she couldn't sell and no funds to honor the contract that she had entered into with the point A. The point A denied giving her the bad drugs, and they still wanted all the money that was due to them. Making matters worse, someone in the cycle knew Antonio, and the rumor mill went into overdrive. Unable to contact Peaches, the point A had gone to Cream, thinking that the three of us were still working for Antonio. The point A was spreading the word that Antonio's operation wasn't paying up. The point C guys were saying that Antonio's operation was trying to pass off an inferior product. None of them realized that Peaches' operation was completely different from mine or Antonio's. It was a disaster. Losing $27,000 would have been a point of contention between most people, and it was obviously no exception. But the news that I received from Cream was the worst case scenario. I would rather Peaches had just stolen the money and skipped town. I could have come back from that. But reputation was everything in the drug business. Losing said reputation could come with a vast array of consequences, not just for me, but for Antonio as well. I had the money, and I could easily have paid off Peaches' debt. But Antonio was different. He wouldn't take Peaches' indiscretion lightly. He respected the life, and he lived by the code. Peaches had put our reputations on the line, and Antonio wouldn't take that sitting down. All I could do was try to get out ahead of it. But that wouldn't be easy. Antonio was in prison. It wasn't as if I could just call or stop by. My only hope was to visit Antonio the next day before the news got to him in some other way. That was my only option. I told Cream not to worry, and that I would handle everything. I stood in an attempt to leave. Cream arose and gave me a hug. She said, "Be careful out there, little girl." She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. Seeing Cream so worried was frightening to me. Cream was always confident and self-assured. She didn't take a lot of mess. If she was worried, it was with legitimate reasoning. I left Cream's apartment with the understanding that I had to fix something that I hadn't broken, and I didn't even know where to start. I sat for a moment, trying to digest everything that I had been fed. And that moment, none of it was worth it. I wish I hadn't trusted Peaches. I wish I hadn't started my own operation. I wish I hadn't agreed to take over Antonio's business. I wish I hadn't ever met Antonio. I went down the list of regrets, but none of them compared to what was to come. Just as I was pulling out of the apartment complex, my cell phone rang. It was Cream, telling me that Antonio's club and Sharon's salon had both been burned to the ground. Chapter 19, Too Far Ahead. Narrated by Shandora Warren. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I got a hotel room for fear that I would be burned alive if I stayed at home. I awoke at 6 o'clock the next morning, prepared to face the music. I got dressed, making sure to look nice, but not too nice. I wanted to look pretty enough to appeal to any residual attraction that Antonio may have had towards me, but not so good to the point that he would think I had been using his money to further my lifestyle. I was past the favor age for Antonio, and I knew it. I would have to connect on something deeper, or maybe I could just beg for forgiveness. But then I had a thought. My only mistake was trusting Peaches. Antonio was intelligent. I thought I could make him understand that. If I could get through to Antonio, Maybe he could straighten things out with the point A and point C. That didn't help Peaches, but her broken bones were on her. It was unfortunate, but I couldn't help her. That was the web that she had woven. You know what they say. When you play dumb games, you win dumb prizes. What Peaches did was dumb, and that was on her. I went through the search area and made my way to the back of the prison. I sat at the table in the visitation area, twiddling my thumbs and awaiting the inevitable. Finally, Antonio emerged through the double doors. Even though it had only been a week since our last visit, Antonio looked completely different. He wasn't different in weight or stature, just tired, worn even. Immediately, I knew that Antonio was already aware of the situation. Maybe he didn't know the whole story, but he knew some variation thereof. It was all over his face. For the first time in the 3 years since his incarceration, Antonio failed to greet me with a kiss and a hug. He bypassed me as I stood, never making an attempt to acknowledge my request to hug him. Antonio sat and got straight to business. He interlocked his fingers and placed his forearms on the table. He looked into my eyes and began to speak. He said, "When I was about to go away, I only asked a few things of you. In sound mind and body, you agreed, did you not? So why is it that with 3 months left in my sentence, I have to hear that you have failed in every area? I ask you to handle my business, and I ask you not to have me looking stupid. Somehow, you have managed to fail at both. Please tell me something that's going to make this make sense to me, Shelonda." I sat for a moment, ensuring that his pause indicated an invitation for response. My heart was pounding. As if Antonio's temperament wasn't scary enough, he called me Shelonda. Antonio didn't make a habit of calling me Shelonda unless he was angry. I explained the story start to finish, just as Cream had explained it to me. I spilled it out like hot tea, never giving Antonio an opportunity to get a word in. He sat quietly throughout my entire rant. Upon the completion of my explanation, I expected that my fault would be diminished in Antonio's eyes. At the very least, I expected him to say that he understood. Instead, Antonio sat back in his chair and laughed. He said, "Do you think you've told me something that I didn't already know?" I was confused. So why was he so angry? Knowing that Peaches was to blame, why was Antonio still so angry with me? I guess the confusion showed on my face. Of course, Antonio decided to elaborate. But he didn't just elaborate. Antonio did what he always did. He used an animal reference to break it down to me. He said, "Let me put it to you like this. Let's say you want a dog. Of all the dogs you could have chosen, you decided on a feral dog. You choose this dog because it needed something. And you always need to be needed. You nurture this dog and you grow to love it. Everything in your spirit tells you that it loves you too. And why wouldn't it? You have been good to that dog. But there's something that you have failed to understand. A feral dog isn't a domestic dog. They play by different rules. They have different mentalities. A domestic dog will be loyal and protective of you because you have loved and nurtured it. A feral dog will be loyal to the pack because that's how he was bred. Nonetheless, you're stuck with that wild dog with no understanding of the danger that it presents. One day you take your dog out for a walk in the woods. In the process, you encounter a pack of wild dogs that your dog hasn't ever been exposed to. Not only will your dog not protect you, but it will join the other dogs in the eating of you. That's what wild animals do. Helping the pack eat will always take precedence over being loyal to an outsider, even one who has loved and nurtured them. Peaches is a wild dog, a rabid dog. I gave you all the information you needed about her, and you still walked her into the woods. But I guess I can blame myself as well. It was I who gave you the wild dog, allowing you to love it at your own discretion. I'm sorry, Shelonda. I should have given you a poodle. I sat for a moment, digesting what Antonio had fed me. He was absolutely correct. I'd heard a lot about the things that Peaches had done, some of which came directly from the horse's mouth. I admit that I was negligent in my use of her, and I was bothered by how things had played out as a result. I couldn't believe that I had pegged the situation so incorrectly. I hated that Antonio was right. I hated that I had to have a conversation on Peaches' behalf. Any explanations that were given should have been on her. I was initially remorseful. I had every intention of trying to make things right. But Antonio began to patronize me. I remember how I felt when he uttered the words. They took me to a place that I couldn't come back from. He said, "You're a good girl, Shelonda. But I shouldn't have depended on you to do anything more than multiplication. You're just not built like that." I laughed and addressed him. Antonio was very good about dishing out the words, but I felt that the time had arrived for him to be on the other end. I said, "Okay, Antonio, since you like animal references so much, here's one for you. Do you know about the mating rituals between male and female praying mantises? Well, let me enlighten you. In spite of her reverent demeanor, the female praying mantis is actually a cannibalistic predator. She lures male praying mantises in with her pheromones. When a prospective mate approaches, he engages in a courtship ritual. If deemed worthy, he's allowed to hitch a ride on the much larger female's back with the intent to impregnate her. Without provocation, the female mantis hungrily chews off her partner's head during or shortly after the sexual encounter. Some say that the female's decision is based on her knowledge that the male thrusts more violently without the attachment of his head. It's not out of hunger or anger, but the mere desire for satisfaction. The male is simply a victim of his proximity to the female. His very existence relies on the female's decision to let him live or die. You've gotten this all wrong, Antonio. Your businesses were hanging by a thread before I came along. If not for my intervention, they would have gone down long before your incarceration. I allowed you to jump on my back because I felt that you were worthy. And now you want to belittle and patronize me? Me, Antonio? The one who carried your burden on my back because yours wasn't big enough? That's laughable, Antonio. You're a real piece of work. I sidetracked my entire life for your benefit, and you are ungrateful in discrediting the good that I brought to this situation. In fact, you were negligent in getting locked up and even putting me in this situation. You're a little boy. What grown man goes to jail for smoking weed and leaves someone who's not built like that to handle his business? And now you're all puffed up because one thing went out of order. Now you're acting like I haven't been carrying you on my back. Let me explain something to you, Antonio, because you're obviously not aware of who I am. I am not the scavenger shrimp that will eat you because you're available. I'm not the clownfish that will eat what you provide for me. I'm not the lion who will eat you because you have failed to feed me. I'm not the feral dog that will eat you out of loyalty to someone else. I am the female praying mantis. I am carrying you, but understand that I will eat you for no reason other than my personal desire to do so. That's who I am. And don't you ever forget that. And make no mistake about it, you never gave Peaches to me. I took her, just like I took everything else. I could see the anger rising within Antonio, but I didn't care. I wanted him to feel the way he had made me feel. I saw that he was searching for words, and I was happy about that. Putting him in his place made me feel confident, powerful even. Antonio sat up and leaned in close. He tapped his fingers on the table, a habit that I'd recognized as a sign of frustration. He was very calm and deliberate. He said, "Shelonda, I'm trying with you because I love you, but you're forcing my hand." I leaned in and attempted to imitate his tone. I replied, "You can call me Star, like all the other dope boys." Antonio laughed. I could tell that he was genuinely amused. He told me that he'd always had an affinity for my spunk. Antonio addressed me in a way that only he could. He said, "I'll tell you what. Since you want to be grown, I'm going to treat you like I would treat anybody else. At the completion of my sentence, you will be required to sign over all of my businesses as well as your bar. You will advise your point A that he will be working with me when I'm released, and you will set up a meeting between he and I, one to which you will not be invited. But above all else, you will replace Sharon Salon. That's what's going to happen, little girl." It was my time to laugh. "What makes you think I would do that?" I asked. He only said 2 words. "Ask Peaches." In hindsight, I know I had pushed him too far, but there was no turning back. My words were arrogant and smug, just as I had perceived his to be. I said, "Really, Antonio?" I didn't think I had to break this down to you, but I apparently gave you too much credit. I'm not Peaches and Cream. You don't scare me. I understand that you had Peaches dancing for free to pay off a debt, but you're not going to bully me like you did her. Not only are you trying to bully me, but you're threatening me? Ask Peaches? You going to get your goons to beat me up like they did her? Let me tell you something, Antonio. You've been locked up for all this time while I've been successfully running your businesses. How relevant do you really think you are? Your goons are my goons now. And Sharon Salon? I will replace her salon if, and only if, you guys stay on my good side. Now, let's talk about my operation. It will be a cold day in purgatory before my point A will work with you. That I know for sure. Don't get so far ahead of yourself that you get left behind. I sat back, confident in the speech that I had just delivered. Antonio readjusted and delivered his response. He said, "I love you, and I have every reason to believe that we can work this out when I get home. But for now, you need to learn how to stay in a child's place. Go talk to Peaches when you leave here. Come back tomorrow and let me know if you've changed your mind. Don't worry about the connects. I'll handle them. I love you. See you tomorrow, Star." I told Antonio that I would see him in a week. Sometimes I replay his words in my mind. I love you. See you tomorrow, Star. There was something about the way he said it. It was ominous in nature. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. Just as he was walking away, Antonio turned and addressed me one final time. He said, "Don't forget to set up that meeting with your point A. It's going to be a cold day in purgatory. Make sure your Diablo has a jacket." Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.